The San Juan Mountains of Colorado were a fortress of stone and silence in the dead of winter. Snow lay thick on the high peaks, turning the world into a study of whites and grays, broken only by the dark, skeletal fingers of pine trees that climbed the steep ridges. The air at 9,000 feet was thin and sharp, cold enough to burn the lungs with each breath. It was a landscape that demanded respect, a place where nature reminded you that humans were temporary visitors, tolerated but never truly welcome. For Marcus Chen, that brutal indifference was exactly what he needed. His cabin was a small, functional structure of rough-hewn timber perched on the edge of an alpine meadow, backed against a sheer granite cliff that protected it from the worst of the winter winds. Smoke rose in a thin gray line from its stone chimney, the only sign of habitation for miles in any direction. He had chosen this place not for its stark beauty, but for its isolation. The nearest town, Silver Point, was a 40-minute drive down a treacherous mountain road that became impassable for weeks at a time when the storms rolled in. Marcus Chen was 34 years old, but his eyes were decades older. He was built like a weapon, compact, powerful, every ounce of muscle serving a specific tactical purpose. His movements were economical, precise, the product of thousands of hours of training that had turned his body into an instrument of controlled violence. His face was a map of hard miles, a strong jaw, high cheekbones that spoke to his Chinese-American heritage, and a thin scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his temple, a souvenir from Kandahar that he never discussed. His eyes were what people noticed most. They were dark, almost black, and they held the flat, watchful calm of a man who had seen humanity at its absolute worst and could never quite forget it. He was a Navy SEAL on indefinite leave, though the term leave was a bureaucratic fiction. It was exile, self-imposed, but exile nonetheless. He had come to these mountains 6 months ago, driving north from Coronado with everything he owned packed into the back of a battered Ford F-150. He was running from the memories, from the weight of decisions made in split seconds, from the faces of the people he couldn't save. Most of all, he was running from the last mission, the one that had ended with his swim buddy, David Reaper Morrison, bleeding out in his arms in a dusty compound while Marcus screamed for a medevac that arrived 3 minutes too late. 3 minutes. An eternity measured in heartbeats and failing breaths. His only companion in this self-imposed exile was Phantom. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Phantom was a Belgian Malinois, 85 pounds of coiled muscle, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. His coat was a rich fawn color with a black mask that made his amber eyes seem to glow with an almost supernatural intensity. He was a former military working dog, trained for explosives detection and tactical assault, and he had served alongside Marcus for 4 years in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. When Marcus had been granted his leave, Phantom had been scheduled for retirement and reassignment to a civilian handler. Marcus had called in every favor he had, pulled every string, worked through every level of bureaucracy until the Navy had finally, reluctantly, allowed him to adopt his partner. They were a bonded pair, 2 survivors of the same war, and separating them would have been like severing a limb. Phantom understood Marcus in ways no human could. The dog knew when the nightmares were coming, could sense the shift in Marcus's breathing, the tension that crept into his muscles even in sleep. On those nights, Phantom would climb onto the bed without invitation, pressing his solid, warm body against Marcus's side, a living anchor that pulled him back from the darkness. Their days in the mountains fell into a Spartan, disciplined rhythm. Marcus would wake before dawn, his body's internal clock still set to military time. He would run a brutal circuit through the snow, 5 miles of high-altitude punishment that left his lungs screaming and his legs trembling. Phantom would run beside him, never flagging, his breath coming in steady white clouds in the frozen air. After the run came an hour of calisthenics and hand-to-hand combat drills, shadow boxing against invisible enemies in the small clearing behind the cabin. Then breakfast, black coffee, eggs, protein, consumed in silence while he stared out the window at the mountains. The rest of the day was maintenance, chopping wood, checking supplies, cleaning weapons he hoped never to use again, and long patrols through the surrounding wilderness with Phantom ranging ahead, a dark shape against the brilliant white snow. It was on one of these patrols, 3 days after a massive blizzard had dumped 2 feet of fresh powder on the high country, that everything changed. They were walking along the eastern ridge of the valley, following a game trail that deer used to move between feed-in areas. The sky was a hard, brittle blue, so bright it hurt to look at, and the sun reflecting off the snow was blinding. Marcus wore polarized sunglasses and still had to squint. The world was silent except for the crunch of his boots and the soft whisper of Phantom's paws on the packed snow. Phantom was trotting about 20 yards ahead, his head swiveling back and forth, his nostrils flaring as he read the invisible stories written on the wind. Suddenly, without warning, the dog stopped dead. His entire body went rigid, his ears standing straight up, his tail dropping to a horizontal line. A low growl, deep and guttural, began to rumble in his chest. Marcus's hand instinctively went to the Sig Sauer P320 holstered at his hip. His eyes scanned the tree line, searching for threats, mountain lion, bear, or something worse. He saw nothing but pristine snow and the dark shapes of pine trees casting long blue shadows. "Phantom, report," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, using the command voice that had been drilled into him 1,000 times. The dog didn't relax. Instead, he took 3 deliberate steps forward, his nose lifted high, sampling the air. Then he looked back at Marcus, his amber eyes wide and urgent, and let out a single sharp bark. It wasn't aggression, it was alarm. Something was wrong. Deeply, profoundly wrong. Marcus trusted Phantom's instincts more than he trusted his own eyes. The dog's senses were sharper, cleaner, uncorrupted by the cognitive distortions of human trauma. If Phantom said there was a threat, there was a threat. "Show me," Marcus commanded. Phantom didn't hesitate. He broke into a lope, not a frantic run but a determined, purposeful movement, angling off the game trail and plunging into deeper snow. Marcus followed, his hand still resting on his pistol, his body settling into the familiar state of heightened awareness that had kept him alive through 100 firefights. They moved through the forest, climbing steadily, the terrain growing rougher and more treacherous. Marcus's breath came in white clouds, his lungs burning in the thin air. Phantom was relentless, pushing through snowdrifts that came up to his chest, navigating around fallen logs and clusters of boulders with the confidence of a creature following an invisible map. After 30 minutes of hard climbing, they crested a narrow ridge, and Marcus saw it. A dark, irregular opening in the granite face of the mountain, half hidden by a fallen pine tree and a curtain of icicles. It was the entrance to an old mine, one of hundreds that dotted these mountains, relics of the silver boom that had brought prospectors flooding into the San Juans in the 1880s. Most of the old mines were sealed, filled in or barricaded to prevent hikers from wandering into unstable shafts and collapsing tunnels. But this one was open, and from deep within its darkness, barely audible over the whisper of wind through the pines, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice, thin, desperate, unmistakably human. "Please, somebody, help." It was a woman's voice, weak and hoarse, echoing up from the depths of the mountain, and beneath it, softer, was another sound, the quiet, hitching sobs of a child. Phantom whined, a sound of profound distress, and looked up at Marcus with those intelligent, pleading eyes. The message was clear. We have to help them. Marcus's mind was already shifting gears, moving from the numb, disconnected state he'd been living in for months into something sharp and focused. This wasn't just a patrol anymore, this was a mission. And every instinct he possessed, every hour of training, every lesson learned in blood and fire, was screaming at him that whatever was happening in that mine, it was bad. Had come to these mountains to escape, to be alone, to avoid exactly this kind of situation. But as he stood at the entrance to that dark shaft, with his dog at his side and the desperate pleas of the innocent echoing up from the darkness, he knew with absolute certainty that his war wasn't over. It had just found him again. Marcus approached the mine entrance with the methodical caution of a man who understood that darkness could hide anything. He pulled a high-powered tactical flashlight from his pack, clicking it on and sending a brilliant white beam lancing into the black void. The entrance was about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide, supported by ancient timber beams that were black with age and moisture. Ice coated the walls, and the air that flowed out of the opening carried the smell of damp stone and something else, something organic and foul that made his nose wrinkle. Phantom was at his side, pressed close against his leg, still growling low in his throat. The dog wanted to go in, but he was disciplined enough to wait for the command. "Hello?" Marcus called into the darkness, his voice echoing off unseen stone walls. "Can you hear me? I'm here to help." The response was immediate, a desperate, sobbing gasp. "Oh God, please, we're trapped. He's coming back." "He's coming back." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't hikers who'd gotten lost or injured spelunkers waiting for rescue. Someone had put these people down here. Someone was holding them prisoner. His hand tightened on his pistol. The tactical part of his brain was already running scenarios, calculating angles and risks. An underground environment was a tactical nightmare. Limited mobility, no visibility, countless places for an ambush. But the human part of him, the part that had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, wouldn't let him walk away. He keyed his satellite phone, hoping for a signal this high up. The screen showed a single flickering bar. He quickly typed a message to the Silver Point Sheriff's Department. "Mine entrance, East Ridge of Widow's Peak. Possible hostage situation. Investigating. Send backup." He hit send and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. After 10 agonizing seconds, it showed delivered. It was the best he could do. Help was at least an hour away, probably longer given the snow and the terrain. Whatever was happening in this mine, he was on his own. Marcus pulled a small can of spray paint from his pack and marked a large red X on the rock face beside the entrance, a breadcrumb for the rescue teams. Then he turned to Phantom. "Heel," he commanded, keeping his voice low and steady. "Quiet search, slow and careful." Phantom's ears went forward, his body settling into the focused, controlled state of a working dog. He moved into the mine entrance, his nose to the ground, and Marcus followed, his flashlight sweeping the darkness, his pistol held in a two-handed grip at low ready. The tunnel sloped, downward at a steep angle, the floor rough and uneven, covered in a mixture of ice, mud, and loose rock. The timber support beams appeared every 10 feet, their surfaces slick with moisture. Marcus moved carefully, testing each step, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The temperature dropped rapidly as they descended, and his breath came in thick white clouds. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber, an old ore room where miners had once blasted and dug out veins of silver. The ceiling was higher here, perhaps 12 feet, supported by a lattice of ancient beams. Marcus's light swept across rusted mining equipment, a collapsed ore cart, pickaxes with rotted handles, coils of cable that had turned to rust. And, in the far corner, huddled against the wet stone wall, were two figures. A woman sat with her back against the rock, her arms wrapped protectively around a small child who was pressed against her chest. They were both filthy, their clothes torn and muddy, their faces hollow with exhaustion and terror. The woman's eyes, wide and desperate in the beam of Marcus's flashlight, were the eyes of someone who had been through hell and expected nothing but more suffering. The child, a little girl no more than 5 years old, had her face buried in her mother's shoulder. Her small body was shaking with silent sobs. Marcus holstered his pistol immediately, not wanting to add to their terror. He raised his hands, showing them he was unarmed, and took a slow step forward. "My name is Marcus," he said softly. "I'm a Navy SEAL. I'm here to help you. You're safe now." The woman stared at him, and for a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak. Then her face crumpled, and a sob of pure relief tore from her throat. "Please," she gasped. "Please get us out of here. He's insane. He's going to kill us." Marcus moved closer, kneeling a few feet away so he wouldn't tower over them. Now that he was closer, he could see the full extent of their condition. The woman, she looked to be in her late 20s, had bruises on her face and arms, dark purple marks that stood out starkly against her pale skin. Her wrists were raw and bloody, rope burns that suggested she'd been bound recently. The little girl's hands and feet were blue with cold, her thin jacket utterly inadequate for the freezing temperature. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Rebecca," the woman whispered. "Rebecca Morrison. And this is Emma." Morrison. The world seemed to tilt. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Morrison," he repeated, his voice sounding distant and strange to his own ears. Rebecca nodded, her eyes searching his face, sensing the shift in his demeanor. "Yes. My husband was David Morrison. He was a Navy SEAL. He died 2 years ago in Afghanistan." Time stopped. The cold, the darkness, the very stone walls around them seemed to recede into a distant fog. Marcus was back in that dusty compound, kneeling in the dirt, his hands slick with his best friend's blood, watching the light fade from Reaper's eyes. He remembered David's last words, gasped out through the pain. "Tell Becca. Tell Emma. I love them." This was Reaper's wife, his daughter, the family Marcus had been too broken, too consumed by his own guilt, to visit after the funeral. "You knew him," Rebecca said, and it wasn't a question. She could see the recognition, the grief, written plainly on his face. "He was my swim buddy," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper. "My best friend. I was with him when—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The wound was too raw, too deep. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, placing a trembling hand on his arm. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being with him." The moment was broken by a sound from deep in the mine, the distant scrape of boots on stone, the echo of footsteps approaching from a deeper tunnel that Marcus hadn't seen in the darkness. Phantom's head snapped toward the sound, his lips pulling back from his teeth in a silent snarl. "He's coming!" Rebecca gasped, her face going white with terror. "He always comes back." Marcus was on his feet in an instant, his body moving with the fluid efficiency of a lifetime of training. "Who's coming?" he demanded. "Who did this to you?" "His name is Garrett Vance," Rebecca said, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "He's David's cousin. After David died, he offered to help us, to manage David's estate, to help with Emma. But he wanted something. David had told me about a safety deposit box, a place where he kept documents about things he'd seen on missions, evidence of corruption, of war crimes. David said it was insurance, something to protect us if anything ever happened to him." She was shaking now, her voice rising in pitch. "Garrett said the documents were worth millions to the right people. He wanted them. When I wouldn't tell him where they were, he took us, 3 days ago. He brought us here and said he'd leave us to freeze unless I told him everything." The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied now by the beam of another flashlight bouncing off the tunnel walls. Marcus's mind was working at combat speed, processing information, calculating angles. He had perhaps 30 seconds before whoever was coming reached this chamber. He had a woman and child who were injured, hypothermic, and terrified. He had limited cover and no backup, but he also had something else. The cold, focused rage of a man who had failed his brother once and would die before failing his family again. He turned to Rebecca. "Can you walk?" She nodded, struggling to her feet and lifting Emma in her arms. The little girl whimpered but didn't cry out. "Phantom, guard," Marcus commanded, and the dog immediately moved to stand between Rebecca and Emma and the tunnel entrance, his body a wall of protective muscle. Marcus positioned himself behind a large boulder, his pistol drawn and aimed at the tunnel mouth. His hands were rock steady, his breathing controlled. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was an operator. He was back in the game, and this time he wasn't going to fail. The footsteps stopped. A voice, smooth and cultured, echoed through the chamber. "Rebecca, are you finally ready to be reasonable?" A figure stepped into the chamber, his flashlight sweeping across the space. He was in his early 40s, tall and lean, dressed in expensive outdoor gear that looked like it had never seen a day of real use. His face was handsome in a cold, calculating way, with sharp features and pale blue eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. This was Garrett Vance, and even at first glance, Marcus could see the arrogance, the entitled cruelty of a man who believed the world owed him everything. Garrett's flashlight beam found Rebecca and Emma, then swept across to find Phantom. He stopped, his expression shifting from confident superiority to surprised confusion. "What the hell is a dog doing? Drop the light and put your hands up," Marcus commanded, his voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Do it now." Garrett spun toward the sound, his flashlight beam finding Marcus's position. His eyes widened as he saw the pistol aimed directly at his chest. For a moment, there was perfect silence in the chamber, broken only by the distant drip of water and the low, threatening growl coming from Phantom's throat. Then Garrett smiled. It was a cold, confident smile that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "You must be the hermit from up the valley," Garrett said, his voice utterly calm. "I've heard about you. The broken seal hiding in the mountains. Tell me, do you even know who these people are?" "I know everything I need to know," Marcus replied. "You're holding them against their will, you've assaulted them, and you're about 30 seconds away from spending the rest of your life in a federal prison." Garrett's smile widened. "That's where you're wrong, soldier. See, you're not a cop. You have no authority here, and if you shoot me, and I can see in your eyes that you want to, you'll go to prison for murder. Self-defense doesn't apply when you're trespassing in an abandoned mine." He took a step forward, his confidence returning. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to lower that weapon and walk away. Forget you ever saw us. Go back to your cabin and your PTSD and leave me to finish my business here. Because if you don't—" He didn't get to finish the sentence. Marcus had been watching Garrett's right hand, had seen the subtle shift in his posture, the way his fingers had crept toward the inside of his jacket. When Garrett's hand moved, Marcus moved faster. The chamber exploded with sound and violence. Garrett's hand was still reaching for whatever weapon he had concealed in his jacket when Marcus closed the distance between them in 3 explosive strides. He wasn't going to give this man a chance to pull a gun, not with Rebecca and Emma in the line of fire, not in this enclosed space where a ricochet could kill them all. Marcus's left hand shot out like a striking snake, clamping down on Garrett's wrist with crushing force, arresting the movement before the weapon could clear the jacket. In the same fluid motion, Marcus drove his right elbow hard into Garrett's solar plexus, the impact driving the air from his lungs in a pained whoosh. Garrett doubled over, gasping, and Marcus used the momentum to spin him around and slam him face first into the wet stone wall. The flashlight fell from Garrett's hand, its beam spinning wildly across the chamber floor. Marcus yanked Garrett's arm up behind his back in a textbook joint lock, applying just enough pressure to send jolts of pain shooting through the man's shoulder without dislocating it. Yet. "Don't move," Marcus hissed directly into Garrett's ear. "Don't even breathe wrong." With his free hand, Marcus reached into Garrett's jacket and pulled out a compact 9mm pistol. A nice piece, expensive, probably never fired outside of a range. He dropped the magazine, ejected the chambered round, and tossed the disabled weapon into the darkness. Phantom was at his side now, his teeth bared, a continuous low growl rumbling in his chest. The dog was waiting for the command to attack, every muscle coiled and ready. "Easy, boy," Marcus said softly. "I've got him." Garrett was breathing hard, his face pressed against the cold stone, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "You're making a huge mistake," he gasped. "Do you have any idea who I am? Who my family is? My uncle is Senator—" Marcus increased the pressure on the joint lock, and Garrett's words dissolved into a pained cry. "I don't care if your uncle is the president," Marcus said, his voice cold and flat. "You kidnapped a woman and child. You assaulted them. You left them to freeze to death in the dark. None of your connections are going to save you from that." He pulled a length of paracord from his pocket. He always carried it, a habit from his SEAL days, and quickly bound Garrett's hands behind his back with a series of knots that wouldn't slip or loosen. Then he shoved the man down to a sitting position against the wall. "Stay," Marcus commanded, and the single word carried enough menace that Garrett went perfectly still. Marcus turned his attention back to Rebecca and Emma. The woman was standing now, still holding her daughter, and she was staring at Marcus with an expression that was equal parts relief and awe. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked, his voice softening as he approached them. "Either of you?" Rebecca shook her head. "Cold, hungry, scared, but we're okay. He didn't—" She glanced at Emma and lowered her voice. "He didn't hurt us that way. He just wanted the information." Marcus gently examined Emma, checking her fingers and toes for frostbite, looking for signs of serious injury or hypothermia. The little girl was shivering violently, her lips tinged with blue, but she was conscious and alert. That was good. That meant they had time. He shrugged off his heavy down jacket and wrapped it around Emma, the garment swallowing her small frame completely. Then he pulled a chemical hand warmer from his pack, cracked it to activate it, and tucked it against her chest. "We need to get you both out of here," he said. "Can you walk, or do I need to carry her?" "I can walk," Rebecca said, though her voice was weak and her legs were shaking. I need to know. The documents David left, are they safe?" Garrett kept saying he had people watching the bank, that he'd get them eventually. Marcus looked at her, this brave, terrified woman who was his dead brother's wife, and made a decision. "Where are they?" he asked. Rebecca hesitated, her eyes searching his face, looking for any sign that he might be working with Garrett, that this might be some elaborate trick. What she saw was the truth, the grief, the determination, the unwavering commitment to protecting them. "The Bank of Denver," she whispered. "Box 847, the key is hidden in the lining of David's old dress uniform, the one he was buried in. I'm the only other person on the access list." Marcus nodded. "Then they're safe, and they're going to stay that way." From his position against the wall, Garrett let out a bitter laugh. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice regaining some of its earlier arrogance. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're dealing with. Those documents are worth $20 million to certain interested parties. $20 million. I have partners, powerful people who want what's in that box. Even if you get these two out of here, even if I go to jail, they'll keep coming. They'll never stop." Marcus turned slowly to face him, and something in his expression made Garrett's smile falter. "Let them come," Marcus said quietly. "I've spent the last 2 years running from ghosts. I'm done running. If anyone wants to get to David Morrison's family, they're going to have to go through me. And I promise you," his voice dropped to a deadly whisper, "that's not going to end well for them." The absolute certainty in his voice, the cold promise of violence in his eyes, was more terrifying than any shout or threat. Garrett shrank back against the wall, suddenly understanding that he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The sound of boots on stone echoed through the chamber, multiple sets of boots, moving fast and converging on their position. Marcus's hand went to his pistol, but then a voice rang out, amplified and official. "This is the Pitkin County Sheriff's Department. Anyone in the mine, identify yourself." Relief washed through Marcus like a physical wave. His message had gotten through. Help had arrived. "Marcus Chen, former Navy SEAL," he called back. "I have 2 hostages safe and 1 suspect restrained." Within minutes, the chamber was flooded with light and activity. A tactical team in full gear swept the space, weapons drawn, clearing corners and checking for additional threats. Behind them came paramedics with emergency gear, blankets, and medical supplies. Sheriff Tom Bridger, a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp gray eyes, took charge of the scene. He looked at Marcus, at Rebecca and Emma, at the bound and silent Garrett, and his expression hardened. "Get statements from everyone," he ordered his deputies. "Bag and tag that weapon." And someone read Mr. Vance his rights, loudly. As the paramedics wrapped Rebecca and Emma in thermal blankets and began treating them for hypothermia, one of the deputies, a young woman with kind eyes, knelt beside Emma. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said gently. "You're very brave. Can you tell me your name?" Emma, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, looked up at the deputy. Then her eyes found Marcus, standing a few feet away with Phantom at his side. She pulled one small hand out from under the thermal blanket and pointed directly at him. "That's my daddy's friend," she said, her voice small but clear. "He came to save us, just like Daddy would have." The chamber went silent. Every person present, hardened cops, experienced paramedics, tactical operators, felt the weight of those words. Rebecca was openly crying now, clutching her daughter, her eyes locked on Marcus. Marcus felt something break open inside his chest, something that had been locked and frozen for 2 years. The guilt, the grief, the crushing weight of failure. It didn't disappear, but it shifted, transformed into something else. Purpose, redemption, a new mission. He had failed David once, but he had just saved David's family. And in that moment, standing in the darkness of an abandoned mine with his brother's wife and daughter safe, he understood that his war wasn't over. It had simply been waiting for him to find the right battle. Sheriff Bridger approached him, his hand extended. "That was good work, son. Clean. Professional. We would have been too late if you hadn't found them." Marcus shook his hand. "I didn't find them, Sheriff. My dog did." He looked down at Phantom, who was sitting calmly at his side, his amber eyes watchful and alert. "He's the real hero here." As the rescue team began the careful process of evacuating everyone from the mine, Garrett was hauled to his feet by 2 burly deputies. As they led him past Marcus, he turned his head, his eyes burning with impotent rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I told you, I have partners. They'll come for the documents. They'll come for her." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself directly in Garrett's path. The deputies stopped, sensing the sudden tension. "No," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. They won't. Because I'm going to make sure everyone in your organization knows exactly what happens to people who threaten the Morrison family. And if anyone is stupid enough to try, he leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Garrett could hear. They'll find out that the most dangerous thing in these mountains isn't the cold or the altitude. It's a Navy SEAL with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Garrett's face went pale. The deputies led him away, and Marcus watched him go, feeling the cold weight of his new mission settling into place. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. Rebecca approached him slowly, Emma still bundled in his jacket. The little girl had her thumb in her mouth, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but she was watching Marcus with an expression of complete trust. "I don't know how to thank you," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "You saved our lives. David would be so proud. He always said you were the best operator he'd ever worked with, the best friend he'd ever had." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Proud. David would be proud. After 2 years of drowning in guilt and self-recrimination, hearing those words from the woman David had loved was like a light breaking through the darkness. "I should have been there for you," Marcus said, the words coming hard. "After the funeral, I should have visited, should have checked on you and Emma. I couldn't face you, couldn't face the reminder of what I'd lost." Rebecca reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, but it was warm and real. "You're here now," she said simply. "That's what matters. You're here now." The journey out of the mine was slow and careful. The rescue team had rigged safety lines and brought portable lights to illuminate the treacherous descent. Marcus walked beside the stretcher carrying Emma, while Rebecca insisted on walking under her own power, supported by a paramedic on each side. Phantom ranged ahead, his nose to the ground, a guardian leading them back to the surface and the light. When they finally emerged from the mine entrance, the world had transformed. The bright Colorado sunshine hit them like a physical force, blinding after the oppressive darkness underground. The crisp, clean mountain air filled Marcus's lungs, washing away the damp, oppressive smell of the mine. He had to stop for a moment, letting his eyes adjust, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face like a benediction. An entire rescue operation had assembled at the mine entrance during the hour they'd been underground. There were 3 sheriff's department vehicles, 2 ambulances, a fire department rescue truck, and a civilian SUV that Marcus didn't recognize. News must have spread fast in the small mountain community. When people went missing in these mountains, especially women and children, the entire county rallied. The paramedics immediately took charge of Rebecca and Emma, loading them into the back of an ambulance and beginning more thorough medical evaluations. Emma was responding well to the warming blankets and hot fluids, but they wanted to get her to the hospital in Durango for a full checkup. Hypothermia and trauma could have delayed effects that weren't immediately visible. Marcus stood off to the side, giving them space, watching as mother and daughter were cared for. Phantom sat at his heel, leaning against his leg, and Marcus absently ran his fingers through the dog's thick fur. The adrenaline was starting to wear off now, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the familiar tremor in his hands that always came after combat. Sheriff Bridger approached, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. He offered one to Marcus, who took it gratefully. "Hell of a thing," the sheriff said, shaking his head. "Hell of a thing. I've been working these mountains for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. A kidnapping and extortion scheme using an abandoned mine as a prison in Pitkin County. It's like something out of a movie." "It's a smart plan, actually," Marcus said, taking a sip of the hot, bitter coffee. "Isolated, off the grid, no cell signal, surrounded by wilderness. Even if they managed to escape, where would they go? Without cold weather gear, they'd be dead from exposure in hours. Bridger's face darkened. That son of a bitch was going to let them freeze to death down there. He told my deputies that he was just applying pressure to get information. Applying pressure, like they were assets, not human beings. "What's his story?" Marcus asked. "What has he told you?" "Nothing useful. He lawyered up the second we got him in the car, but we ran his name through the system." Bridger pulled out a small notepad and flipped it open. "Garrett Vance, age 42, Denver address, clean record, not even a speeding ticket. Works as an investment consultant, whatever the hell that means. But here's the interesting part. He has family connections. His uncle is Senator Richard Vance, the one who sits on the Armed Services Committee." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. That's the leverage. That's why he thought he could get away with this. Political protection. "Maybe," Bridger said, "but I don't give a damn who his uncle is. He committed multiple felonies in my county, and he's going to answer for them. Federal charges, too. Kidnapping across state lines. The FBI is already sending a team from Denver." Marcus turned to look at the second ambulance, where deputies were loading a handcuffed Garrett into the back. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the hatred burning in the man's eyes as he was forced into the vehicle. "Sheriff," Marcus said slowly, "when Garrett was in the mine, he said something. He said he had partners, people who wanted the documents David Morrison left behind, people who would keep coming even if Garrett went to jail." Bridger's expression grew grave. "You think this is bigger than one man?" "I think," Marcus said carefully, "that whatever's in that safety deposit box is valuable enough that someone was willing to kidnap and murder for it. And if there are other people involved, people with resources and connections, then Rebecca and Emma are still in danger." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, his eyes scanning the assembled emergency vehicles and personnel. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that putting them in a hotel in Durango and hoping for the best isn't going to cut it. They need protection, real protection, at least until we know the full scope of what we're dealing with." "I can assign deputies," Bridger began, but Marcus was already shaking his head. "With respect, Sheriff, if these people are as connected as Garrett claims, deputies won't be enough. They need someone who understands how operators think, how professionals move, someone who can anticipate threats before they materialize." Bridger studied him for a long moment. "You offering to be that someone, Mr. Chen?" Marcus looked over at the ambulance where Rebecca and Emma were being treated. He could see Rebecca through the open back doors, holding Emma in her lap, murmuring softly to her daughter. As if sensing his gaze, Rebecca looked up, and their eyes met. There was no question in her expression, no doubt. She trusted him completely. "I owe David Morrison my life a dozen times over," Marcus said quietly. "He saved me in Kandahar, pulled me out of a burning vehicle when I was unconscious. And then I watched him die because our medevac was 3 minutes late. 3 minutes. I've spent 2 years in these mountains trying to outrun that memory, trying to convince myself that it wasn't my fault. But the truth is, I failed my brother. I can't change that, but I can protect his family. So, yes, Sheriff, I'm offering." Bridger nodded slowly. "All right, but I want to be kept in the loop. Daily reports. And the second you think the threat has escalated beyond what you can handle, you call me. Understood?" "Understood." The sheriff extended his hand, and Marcus shook it. "For what it's worth," Bridger said, "I think David Morrison would be proud of you today." Those words again, the second time in an hour that someone had said them. Marcus felt the knot of guilt in his chest loosen just a fraction more. A commotion from the civilian SUV drew their attention. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out, mid-50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a dark pantsuit that looked completely out of place in the mountain wilderness. She walked with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to command, and her eyes were hidden behind expensive sunglasses. She made a beeline for Garrett's ambulance, but a deputy intercepted her. "Ma'am, this is an active crime scene. You need to—" "I'm Margaret Vance," the woman said, her voice carrying across the clearing with the snap of authority. "That's my nephew. I'm his attorney. I need to speak with him immediately." Bridger's jaw tightened. "Miss Vance, your nephew is under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. You can speak with him at the county jail after he's been processed." Margaret Vance turned toward the sheriff, and even from 20 feet away, Marcus could feel the cold assessment in her gaze. "Sheriff Bridger, I presume. I don't think you understand the delicate nature of this situation. My nephew is the grandson of Senator Richard Vance. This matter needs to be handled with discretion." "The only thing I need to handle," Bridger replied, his voice hardening, "is a serious crime. Your nephew held a woman and child hostage in an abandoned mine for 3 days. There's no discretion that makes that acceptable." Margaret's thin smile didn't reach her eyes. "I see. And I suppose you have evidence of these allegations? Witnesses? Physical proof?" "We have 2 victims ready to testify," Bridger said. "We have the crime scene, and we have your nephew's own admission, recorded by multiple officers, that he brought them to the mine." "Ah, but he brought them there for their own protection, didn't he?" Margaret said smoothly. "My nephew will testify that Mrs. Morrison was suffering from a mental health crisis, making threats of self-harm. He brought her to a safe, isolated location while he tried to contact mental health professionals. The unfortunate circumstances, the cold, the darkness, were the result of a genuine emergency that spiraled out of control." Marcus felt his blood run cold. She was already building the defense, already spinning the narrative to turn Garrett from predator to concerned caretaker. "That's bullshit," he said, stepping forward. "I was there. I heard what he said. He was extorting her for information about classified documents. He admitted it." Margaret turned her cold gaze on him. "And you are?" "Marcus Chen. I'm the one who found them. I'm the one who stopped your nephew from letting them freeze to death." "How heroic," Margaret said, her tone making it clear she thought the opposite. "And what exactly is your relationship to Mrs. Morrison? Are you a relative, a professional security consultant, or just a man who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?" "I'm David Morrison's swim buddy," Marcus said, his voice hard. "I served with him for 6 years. He was my brother." Something flickered across Margaret's face. Calculation, reassessment. "I see. How convenient. A traumatized veteran with a personal connection to the alleged victim, stumbling upon a dramatic rescue scenario. Tell me, Mr. Chen, are you currently receiving treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder? Do you take any medications that might affect your perception or judgment?" The implication was clear. She was going to try to discredit him, to paint him as an unreliable witness whose testimony was colored by mental illness and personal bias. "My mental health is irrelevant," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "The evidence speaks for itself. Your nephew is guilty." "Evidence can be interpreted many ways," Margaret said, "and testimony from an unreliable witness can be impeached. I've built my career on defending clients against far more serious allegations than this. By the time I'm done, any jury will have reasonable doubt." Sheriff Bridger stepped between them, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. "Ma'am, this conversation is over. Your nephew's being transported to county lockup. You can visit him there under supervision after he's been booked. Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from the crime scene." For a moment, Margaret Vance looked like she was going to argue. Then she smiled, a thin, cold smile that promised future battles. "Very well, Sheriff, but I think you'll find that this case is far more complicated than you realize. Good day." She turned on her heel and walked back to her SUV, pulling out her phone before she even reached the vehicle. "She's calling the senator," Bridger said quietly. "Within an hour, I'm going to have politicians and bureaucrats crawling up my ass." "Can they make this go away?" Marcus asked. "Not completely, but they can make it difficult. Delay charges, push for reduced bail, apply political pressure." Bridger shook his head. "This is going to be a fight." Marcus watched Margaret's SUV disappear down the mountain road, and he felt the old familiar sensation of mission parameters expanding. This wasn't just about rescuing two people from immediate danger. This was about protecting them from a sustained, well-funded, politically connected threat. "Sheriff," Marcus said, "I need to know everything you can find out about Garrett Vance and his associates. Financial records, phone logs, travel history, everything. If he has partners, I need to know who they are before they make their next move." Bridger nodded. "I'll get my deputies on it. But Chen," he fixed Marcus with a hard stare, "you need to be careful. I know your type. I know how operators think. You're not going to just sit around waiting for the next threat to materialize. You're already planning something." Marcus didn't deny it. "I'm going to do whatever it takes to keep them safe. Just make sure whatever it takes stays on the legal side of the line," Bridger warned. "I cut you some slack because of what you did today, but I can't protect you if you go vigilante on me." "Understood." The paramedics were closing up the back of Rebecca and Emma's ambulance, preparing to transport them to Durango Regional Hospital. Marcus walked over, Phantom at his side, and knocked gently on the back door. Rebecca looked out, her face still pale but her eyes clearer now. "Marcus, I'm going to follow you to the hospital," he said, "and then, once they've cleared you both, I'm going to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere no one can find you while we figure this out. My apartment in Denver," Rebecca began, but Marcus was already shaking his head, "is compromised. Garrett knew where you lived. He probably has keys, maybe even surveillance equipment. We can't go back there." Fear flickered across her face. "Then where?" "My cabin. It's isolated, defensible, and off the grid, and I promise you—" His voice dropped, becoming the hard, certain voice of a SEAL making a tactical promise. "No one is going to get to you there. No one." Emma, who had been dozing against her mother's shoulder, stirred and looked up at Marcus. "Is Phantom coming too?" she asked, her small voice hopeful. Marcus smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually stern face. "Yeah, sweetheart, Phantom's coming too. He's part of the team." Emma smiled back, and in that moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Purpose. Not the hollow, numbing routine of survival, but the sharp, clear sense of mission that had once defined his entire existence. As the ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing, Marcus turned to Phantom. The dog was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes, his head cocked slightly to one side. "Looks like we've got a new job, boy," Marcus said softly. "Time to go back to work." Phantom's tail thumped once against the ground, a single, solid beat of acknowledgement. The dog understood. The mission had changed. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were protecting. And for a Navy SEAL and his K-9 partner, there was no higher calling than that. The drive from the mine to Durango Regional Hospital took 90 minutes, winding down narrow mountain roads that were still slick with ice in the shadows. Marcus followed the ambulance in his truck, Phantom riding in the passenger seat, alert and watchful. His mind was already working through contingencies, running threat assessments, planning defensive positions. The cabin was defensible. He'd chosen it precisely for its tactical advantages. A single access road, clear sight lines, and a natural choke point at the entrance to the property. But it had been designed for one man to defend, not a family of 3. He was going to need to make modifications, more supplies, better communications equipment, weapons. His satellite phone buzzed. A text message from Sheriff Bridger. FBI arriving tomorrow. Want statement from you. Can you come to county seat? Marcus typed back, affirmative, will be there 0900. Another message followed immediately. Ran preliminary check on Garrett Vance. Guy's got money. Lots of it. Investment firm in Denver with connections to defense contractors and private military companies. Digging deeper, will update. Defense contractors and PMCs. That explained the confidence, the arrogance. Garrett wasn't just a white-collar criminal trying to cash in on family tragedy. He was connected to a world of professional violence, to people who could hire operators to do their dirty work. The threat was real, and it was immediate. At the hospital, Rebecca and Emma were admitted for observation. The doctors wanted to monitor them overnight for hypothermia complications and to complete a full examination for injuries. Marcus took up position in the waiting room, a cup of terrible vending machine coffee in his hand, watching the entrance and the corridor with equal vigilance. Phantom lay at his feet, seemingly relaxed, but with his ears constantly swiveling, tracking every sound. The dog was still on duty, still protecting. Around midnight, a doctor emerged, a tired-looking woman in her 40s with kind eyes. "Mr. Chen, Mrs. Morrison would like to speak with you." Marcus followed her through the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors to a private room. Rebecca was sitting up in bed, wearing a hospital gown, an IV line running into her arm. Emma was asleep in a cot beside her, bundled in warm blankets, her small chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep sleep. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake Emma. "Better, warm, safe." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "The doctors say we're going to be fine. No permanent damage from the cold. Emma had the beginning of frostbite on 2 of her toes, but they think it will heal completely." "That's good. That's really good." Rebecca was silent for a moment, staring down at her hands. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I need to tell you something. About the documents. About what David left behind." Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "I'm listening. David told me. He told me that what he documented wasn't just war crimes by enemy combatants. It was corruption. High-level corruption involving U.S. defense contractors, military procurement officers, and politicians. He said there were companies billing the government for equipment that was never delivered, for services that were never performed. Hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from taxpayers while soldiers went into battle with substandard gear. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard rumors of this kind of thing, whispers in the teams about contractors getting rich while operators made do with equipment that failed in the field. David tried to report it through official channels. Rebecca continued. He went to his commanding officer, to the inspector general. But nothing happened. The reports disappeared. He was told to stand down, that he was mistaken, that he was creating problems. So he started documenting everything. Photographs, financial records, witness statements. He kept copies of everything in that safety deposit box. And Garrett knew about this? David made the mistake of mentioning it to his father, Garrett's uncle, thinking family loyalty would protect him. But his father was friends with one of the senators on the Armed Services Committee, the same senator whose nephew is Garrett. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes haunted. The corruption goes all the way to the top. That's why they're so desperate to get those documents. It's not just about money. It's about prison time for very powerful people. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture that was far uglier than Marcus had imagined. This wasn't just a greedy relative trying to cash in. This was a conspiracy involving politicians, military brass, and defense contractors, people with the resources to make problems disappear permanently. The people Garrett was working with, Marcus said slowly, Do you know who they are?" Rebecca shook her head. "He never told me names. He just kept saying that he had partners who would pay $20 million for the documents. But Marcus," her voice dropped even lower, "I think they're the same people who got David killed." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What?" "The mission where David died. It was supposed to be a simple extraction. Get a local interpreter out of a compromised position. But the intel was wrong. It was an ambush. David said something to me before he left for that deployment, something that didn't make sense at the time. He said, 'If anything happens to me, Becca, don't trust the official story. The only people you can trust are my brothers in the teams.'" Marcus felt the room tilt. The mission that had killed David, that had left Marcus broken and guilt-ridden for 2 years. What if it hadn't been bad luck or faulty intelligence? What if it had been deliberate? What if someone had sent them into that ambush knowing they wouldn't come back? "You think they tried to silence him," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "I don't know. I don't have proof. But the timing—" Rebecca wiped at her eyes. 2 months after he tried to blow the whistle, he was dead. And now they're coming after me and Emma to get the evidence he left behind." Marcus stood up, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. The familiar rage was building in his chest, but this was different from the combat fury he'd learned to control. This was cold. This was calculated. This was the fury of a man who had just learned that his brother's death might not have been the tragic accident he'd believed it to be. "I need to see those documents," he said. "The bank is in Denver, box 847. I'm on the access list, but I need to be there in person with ID and the key." "Where's the key?" Rebecca's voice broke. "In the cemetery, hidden in David's uniform, buried with him." For a long moment, Marcus couldn't speak. The thought of exhuming his brother's grave, of disturbing the final resting place of the man he'd loved like a brother, was almost unbearable. But the alternative, letting David's killers walk free, letting them threaten his family, was worse. "Then that's what we'll do," Marcus said quietly. "Whatever it takes." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head in. "Sorry to disturb, but there's a gentleman here who says he's FBI. He wants to speak with Mrs. Morrison." Marcus's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, where his pistol would normally be holstered. But he'd had to secure it before entering the hospital. He was unarmed. "Tell him she's resting and can't be disturbed," Marcus said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I tried, but he's very insistent. He says it's about her safety." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Rebecca, seeing his own suspicion reflected in her eyes. "I'll handle it," he said. He stepped out into the corridor, the nurse pointing to a man standing by the nurse's station. He was in his 40s, wearing a dark suit and tie, with short cropped hair and the ramrod posture of former military. He held up a leather credential case as Marcus approached. "Special Agent Tom Mitchell, FBI Denver Field Office," he said. "You must be Marcus Chen. I've been briefed on the situation. I need to speak with Mrs. Morrison about the kidnapping and about her late husband's classified documentation." Marcus didn't move aside. "She's not giving statements tonight. She's exhausted, traumatized, and under medical care. Come back tomorrow." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Mr. Chen, this is a federal investigation. I don't need your permission to. You need a warrant to interview her against her will," Marcus interrupted. "Do you have one?" Mitchell's jaw clenched. "No, but—" "Then this conversation is over. Come back tomorrow with proper paperwork and we'll talk." For a moment, Mitchell looked like he was going to push the issue. Then he nodded slowly. "Fine. But, Mr. Chen, I need you to understand something. If those documents contain classified information, and if Mrs. Morrison accesses them without proper authorization, she could be charged with violations of the Espionage Act. I'm trying to help her, not hurt her." "Noted," Marcus said coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a family to protect." He turned and walked back into Rebecca's room, closing the door firmly behind him. Through the small window, he watched Mitchell stand in the corridor for a long moment before finally turning and walking away. "FBI?" Rebecca asked, her face pale. "Claims to be." But something felt off. His credentials looked real, but... Marcus pulled out his phone and quickly typed a message to Sheriff Bridger. "FBI agent named Tom Mitchell just tried to interview Rebecca at hospital. Can you verify he's legit?" The response came back within minutes. "Checking. Stand by." 10 minutes later, "No Tom Mitchell on FBI Denver roster. Description matches known private investigator named Thomas Michaels. Works for defense contractor Sentinel Solutions. You were right to be suspicious." Marcus showed the message to Rebecca, whose face went even paler. "They sent a fake FBI agent? They're that desperate?" "They're that connected," Marcus corrected. "They have the resources to forge credentials to impersonate federal agents, which means we can't trust anyone official until we know for sure whose side they're on." He pulled his chair closer to Rebecca's bed, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, the hospital is going to discharge you. I'm going to take you and Emma to my cabin. It's isolated, defensible, and off the grid. Once you're safe there, I'm going to Denver to retrieve those documents. Then we're going to figure out exactly who we're dealing with and how to stop them." "You can't go to Denver alone," Rebecca protested. "If they're watching the bank, they won't be watching for me. They're watching for you. I'll go in quiet and get the documents and get out. But first, I need to make sure you and Emma are secure." Emma stirred in her sleep, whimpering softly. Rebecca reached out and gently stroked her daughter's hair, her hand trembling. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared, Marcus. These people killed David. They tried to kill us. What if they won't," Marcus said, and the absolute certainty in his voice was like steel. "I failed David once. I'm not failing his family. I promise you, Rebecca, on my honor as a SEAL, on David's memory, I will keep you safe. Both of you, no matter what it takes." Rebecca looked at him, seeing the unwavering determination in his eyes, and slowly nodded. "Okay, I trust you." Those 3 words, "I trust you," hit Marcus harder than any bullet ever had. Someone was trusting him again, depending on him, and this time he wasn't going to let them down. He spent the rest of the night in a chair by the door, Phantom at his feet, watching the corridor for any sign of threats. He didn't sleep. He didn't need to. The mission adrenaline was flowing now, sharp and clean, burning away 2 years of fog and numbness. He was a SEAL again. He was protecting his brother's family, and anyone who tried to hurt them was going to learn a very hard lesson about what happened when you threatened the people Marcus Chen had sworn to protect. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the Colorado sun turning the snow-covered peaks into blazing towers of white and gold. Marcus had spent the night coordinating with Sheriff Bridger, arranging for a secure transport from the hospital to his cabin and laying the groundwork for the Denver operation. Rebecca and Emma were discharged at 0800 hours. Marcus had arranged for them to leave through a service entrance, avoiding the main lobby where reporters had started to gather after word of the kidnapping had leaked to the press. He drove his truck right up to the door, Phantom in the back seat, and got them loaded and moving within 2 minutes. The drive back to his cabin took an hour, winding through mountain roads that were familiar to Marcus, but would be nearly impossible for anyone to follow without being spotted. He checked his mirrors constantly, looking for tails, watching for any vehicle that appeared more than once. Nothing. When they finally arrived at the cabin, Rebecca let out a soft gasp. "This is where you've been living?" "It's not much," Marcus admitted, "but it's secure." The cabin was small, but solid, built of thick logs with a stone foundation and a metal roof. It sat in a natural bowl surrounded by pine trees with clear sight lines in all directions and only one access road. Marcus had chosen it specifically for its defensive position. Inside, the cabin was Spartan but clean. A single main room with a kitchen area, a wood stove for heat, a worn couch, and a small table. A loft area above held his bed. There was no television, no internet, no connection to the outside world except for his satellite phone. "The bathroom's through there," Marcus said, pointing to a small door. "Hot water's limited, but there's enough. I'll set you and Emma up in the loft. It's warmer up there. I'll take the couch." "Marcus, we can't kick you out of your own bed. You're not kicking me out. I'm offering. End of discussion." He spent the next hour making the cabin as comfortable as possible for his guests. He brought out extra blankets, stocked the kitchen with food, and showed Rebecca how to use the wood stove. Emma, who had been silent and withdrawn during the drive, began to warm up when Phantom approached her with a rope toy in his mouth. "He wants to play," Marcus explained. "He's good with kids." Emma took the toy hesitantly, and Phantom immediately dropped into a playbow, his tail wagging. Within minutes, they were engaged in a gentle game of tug-of-war, and Marcus heard something he hadn't expected: Emma's laughter. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I haven't heard her laugh in days," she whispered. "She's safe now," Marcus said. "She can feel it. Kids have good instincts about these things." Once everyone was settled, Marcus gathered his gear for the Denver operation. He changed into civilian clothes: jeans, a dark jacket, and hiking boots. He secured his Sig Sauer in a concealed holster and added 2 spare magazines. He packed a small backpack with tools for the graveyard: a folding shovel, a flashlight, gloves, and a crowbar in case the coffin was in a vault. "I'll be gone for about 12 hours, he told Rebecca. "Maybe 16 if there are complications. While I'm gone, you need to stay inside, keep the doors locked, and don't answer for anyone except Sheriff Bridger. He's the only person who knows you're here. If anyone else shows up, anyone, you call me immediately on this." He handed her a satellite phone identical to his own. "What if something happens to you?" Rebecca asked, her voice small. "It won't, but if it does, if you don't hear from me within 24 hours, you call this number." He handed her a card with a phone number written on it. "It's my old platoon chief, Master Chief Dawson. Tell him what's happening. He'll get you to safety." Rebecca took the card with trembling hands. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." "Thank David," Marcus said quietly. "He's the reason I'm still alive. This is just me returning the favor." He knelt down to Emma's level. "Hey, sweetheart, I need to go on a trip, but Phantom's going to stay here with you and your mom. He's going to keep you safe. Can you help him with that job?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I'll be brave," she said in her small voice. "I know you will. You're David Morrison's daughter. Brave is in your blood." He stood, gave Rebecca one final nod, and walked out into the cold morning air. The drive to Denver would take 4 hours. He had a lot of planning to do. The drive gave Marcus time to think, to plan, to prepare mentally for what he was about to do. Exhuming a grave wasn't technically illegal if you had permission from the family, and Rebecca had given him written authorization. But doing it at night, without notifying the cemetery administration, was definitely in a gray area. He didn't care. The official channels had failed David once. Marcus wasn't going to trust them again. He arrived in Denver as the sun was setting, painting the eastern plains in shades of amber and purple. He parked his truck in a grocery store lot several blocks from Fort Logan National Cemetery and walked the rest of the way, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a hiker or a tourist, just another person enjoying the evening. The cemetery was massive, hundreds of acres of rolling green lawns dotted with white headstones in perfect rows. It closed at sunset, but the walls were low, and there were gaps in the fence that someone who knew what they were looking for could slip through easily. Marcus found David's grave just as full darkness fell. It was in Section 30, Row 15, marked with a simple white marble headstone, David R. Morrison, Navy SEAL 1990-2023, beloved husband and father. He gave his life for his brothers. Marcus stood before the grave, a crushing weight settling on his chest. He hadn't been here since the funeral, hadn't been able to face it, and now he was about to disturb his brother's rest. "I'm sorry, brother," he whispered into the darkness. "I'm so sorry, but they killed you, and they're coming for Becca and Emma. I need what you left behind. I need your help one more time." He knelt and began to dig. The work was hard, made harder by his need to remain silent and invisible. He couldn't use power tools, couldn't risk making noise that would draw security. Every shovelful of dirt had to be lifted carefully, quietly. Sweat poured down his face despite the cold. His muscles screamed in protest, but he didn't stop. After 2 hours of grueling work, his shovel hit something solid. Wood. The coffin. Marcus's hands were shaking as he cleared away the remaining dirt and exposed the lid. It was a simple military casket, sealed with a standard locking mechanism. He used the crowbar to gently pry it open, the metal groaning softly in protest. Inside, in the darkness, was David, or what remained of him after 2 years. The body was draped in David's dress uniform exactly as it had been during the funeral. Marcus forced himself to breathe, to stay focused, to treat this as just another mission objective. He reached into the coffin, his hands gentle and respectful, and carefully ran his fingers along the inside lining of the uniform jacket. There, he felt it, a small, hard object sewn into the fabric. Using his knife, he carefully cut the stitches and pulled out a small brass key, the kind used for safety deposit boxes. "Thank you, brother," Marcus whispered. "I've got it. I've got them. They're safe, I promise." He carefully closed the coffin and began the laborious process of refilling the grave. It took another hour, but he made sure to pack the dirt down carefully, to replace the sod, to leave no obvious sign that the grave had been disturbed. David deserved that much dignity. By the time he finished, it was past midnight. He was exhausted, filthy, and emotionally drained. But he had the key, and tomorrow he would have the documents. He made it back to his truck without incident and drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. He paid cash, used a fake name, and crashed hard for 5 hours of deep, dreamless sleep. At 700 hours, he was up, showered, and dressed in clean clothes. He looked like a businessman. Slacks, button-down shirt, dark jacket, nothing that would draw attention. He drove to the Bank of Denver's main branch and arrived 5 minutes after it opened. The safety deposit box area was in the basement, a secure vault accessible only with proper identification and authorization. Marcus presented Rebecca's written permission and her ID, which she'd given him, along with the key. The bank employee, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, examined everything carefully. "You're not Mrs. Morrison," she observed. "No, ma'am. I'm acting on her behalf with her written authorization, her late husband's box. She's unable to come in person due to medical reasons." The woman consulted her computer, then looked at the authorization letter again. Finally, she nodded. "Everything appears to be in order. Follow me." She led him into the vault, a massive room lined with hundreds of small metal doors. She used her key and Marcus's key to open box 847, slid out a long metal container, and placed it on a privacy table. "Take all the time you need," she said, and withdrew. Marcus was alone. He opened the box. Inside were several items: a thick envelope stuffed with documents, a USB drive labeled "Evidence Do Not Lose," several photographs, and a letter in a sealed envelope with "For Becca" written on the front in David's handwriting. Marcus carefully packed everything into his backpack. His hands were steady, but his heart was pounding. This was it. This was what they'd killed David for, what they'd tried to kill Rebecca and Emma for. He was about to leave when he noticed something else at the bottom of the box, a smaller envelope with his own name on it. For Marcus. His hand shook as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper in David's unmistakable scrawl. Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone and things have gone to hell. I always knew they might. I'm sorry, brother. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. But you need to know, the mission that kills me, if I'm right about this, won't be an accident. It'll be murder. The people I'm documenting aren't just thieves, they're killers. And they have reach into the highest levels of the military and government. The evidence in this box proves everything. But be careful who you trust with it. There are good people in the system, but there are also people who'll do anything to bury this. Take care of my girls, Marcus, Becca, and Emma. They're my whole world. If something happens to me, you're the only person I'd trust to protect them. I know you'll think you failed me, brother. I know how your mind works, but you didn't. You never did. You're the best operator I ever served with and the best friend I ever had. Don't let them win. Don't let them bury the truth. Your brother always... David Marcus read the letter 3 times, his vision blurring with tears. David had known. He'd known what was coming, and he'd still walked into that mission because that's what SEALs did. They completed the mission, even when it meant walking into hell. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Then he left the bank, walked to his truck, and started the long drive back to the mountains. He had what he needed now. He had the evidence, he had the truth, and soon David's killers were going to learn what happened when they made an enemy of a Navy SEAL with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The drive back to the cabin should have been a time to relax, to feel the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. But Marcus's mind was racing, processing the implications of what he'd found. He'd only glanced at the documents in the safety deposit box, but what he'd seen was damning. Procurement contracts with inflated prices, payments to shell companies, communications between defense contractors and military procurement officers that clearly showed a pattern of fraud stretching back years. And woven through it all were names. Senator Richard Vance, Colonel James Hartford of the Army Acquisition Corps, CEOs of major defense contractors, a network of corruption that had stolen hundreds of millions of dollars while men like David Morrison died with substandard equipment. The sun was setting by the time Marcus pulled up to his cabin. Smoke was rising from the chimney, a good sign. Rebecca was keeping the fire going. He grabbed his backpack and headed for the door, but it opened before he could knock. Rebecca stood there, her face a mixture of hope and fear. "Did you find them?" "I found them, everything, and something else. A letter from David, for you." Her hand flew to her mouth. Behind her, Emma appeared, phantom at her side. The little girl's face lit up when she saw Marcus. "You came back." "Of course I came back," Marcus said, kneeling down to her level. "I promised, didn't I? And SEALs always keep their promises." Inside, Marcus spread the contents of the safety deposit box on the table while Emma played with Phantom by the fire. Rebecca picked up the sealed letter addressed to her, her hands trembling. "Should I?" she began, but couldn't finish. "Take your time," Marcus said gently. "I'll be here when you're ready to talk." Rebecca took the letter and Emma upstairs to the loft. Marcus heard the soft murmur of Rebecca's voice as she read David's final words to his family. He gave them privacy, focusing instead on organizing the documents. The USB drive contained scanned copies of everything: financial records, emails, photographs of meetings between contractors and military officials. David had been thorough, methodical. He'd built an airtight case. Marcus was so focused on the documents that he almost didn't hear it. The soft crunch of tires on gravel, still distant but approaching. His head snapped up. Phantom was already at the door, a low growl building in his chest. Someone was coming. Marcus moved with fluid efficiency, gathering the documents and shoving them into a fireproof safe he kept bolted to the floor. He grabbed his Sig Sauer and moved to the window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. 3 black SUVs were approaching up the access road, moving slowly and deliberately. Not law enforcement, no lights, no markings, private security or worse. "Rebecca," Marcus called up to the loft, keeping his voice low but urgent. "We have company. Stay upstairs with Emma. Don't come down no matter what you hear." He heard Rebecca's sharp intake of breath, then the sound of her gathering Emma close. Marcus positioned himself behind the thick log wall beside the front door, his pistol held in a 2-handed grip, his breathing controlled. The SUVs pulled up in a semicircle around the cabin, their headlights blazing, effectively spotlighting the front entrance. Doors opened and men emerged, 6 of them, all dressed in tactical gear, all carrying AR-15 rifles. Professional, disciplined, expensive. One man stood apart from the others, older, wearing a long coat despite the cold. Even at a distance, Marcus recognized him from the photographs in David's file. Colonel James Hartford, U.S. Army, retired. One of the key figures in the corruption network. Hartford pulled out a bullhorn. His voice, amplified and echoing off the surrounding trees, was calm and reasonable. "Mr. Chen, I know you're in there. I know you have Rebecca Morrison and her daughter. And I know you retrieved David Morrison's documents from the bank in Denver today." Marcus said nothing, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. "We've been watching you, Mr. Chen. We know your vehicle. We tracked you to Fort Logan, to the bank, and back here. You're a skilled operator, but you're not invisible." Hartford paused. "We don't want anyone to get hurt. We just want the documents. Hand them over and you can all walk away from this. You have my word." The word of a traitor and a murderer. Marcus's jaw clenched. "I know what you're thinking," Hartford continued. "You're thinking you can fight your way out. 6 of my men against 1 of you. Bad odds. But you're not thinking about the bigger picture. Even if you win this engagement, and I don't think you will, where does that leave you? On the run for the rest of your life. And what about Rebecca and Emma? Can you protect them forever?" Marcus's mind was racing through scenarios. 6 trained operators, limited ammunition, civilians upstairs. The tactical picture was grim, but surrender wasn't an option. These men had killed David. They would kill all of them the moment they had the documents. "I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about it," Hartford said. 5 minutes to make the smart choice. I suggest you use them wisely." The men outside settled into positions around the cabin, rifles at the ready. They weren't preparing to breach yet. They were waiting, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. Marcus's satellite phone buzzed silently in his pocket. A text from Sheriff Bridger. "Got your location ping. FBI, real ones, are 20 minutes out. Can you hold? 20 minutes, an eternity in a firefight." But it was hope. Marcus typed back with one hand. 6 hostiles, heavily armed, will hold as long as possible. Bridger's response. Help is coming. Hold the line. Hold the line. It's what SEALs did. It's what David would have expected. Marcus moved quietly through the cabin, checking sight lines, identifying firing positions. The logs were thick enough to stop rifle rounds, at least for a while. The windows were small and high, defensible. The only real weakness was the door, but it was solid oak reinforced with steel plates he had installed himself. From upstairs, he heard Rebecca's soft voice. "Marcus, what do?" "We wait," he called back quietly. "Help is coming. We just need to hold out for 20 minutes. What happens in 20 minutes? The real FBI arrives, and then these bastards are going to prison for the rest of their lives. Outside, Hartford's voice came again. Time's running out, Mr. Chen. I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to negotiate. Let's talk face to face. No weapons, just two professionals having a conversation. Marcus didn't respond. Every second Hartford spent talking was a second closer to rescue. All right, Hartford sighed, his voice taking on a harder edge. I gave you a chance. Remember that. What happens next is on you. The cabin lights went out as someone cut the power line. Darkness fell, broken only by the headlights from the SUVs and the orange glow of the fire in the wood stove. Phantom was at Marcus's side, a low, continuous growl in his throat. The dog knew what was coming. Breach team, go, Hartford ordered. Two of the men moved forward, one carrying a battering ram. They were going to force entry. Marcus waited until they were halfway to the door. Then he fired twice through the small side window, not aiming to kill, but to disable. The suppressive fire did its job. The breach team scattered, diving for cover behind the SUVs. Sniper, one of them shouted. Return fire erupted, bullets slamming into the log walls with heavy thuds. Marcus dropped flat, crawling to a new position. Glass shattered as they took out the windows, but the thick logs held. This can go on all night, Mr. Chen, Hartford shouted. You can't win. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Marcus checked his watch. 18 minutes, more gunfire. They were probing the cabin's defenses, looking for weaknesses. Marcus returned fire sparingly, conserving ammunition, making each shot count. He wasn't trying to win. He was just trying to survive. 15 minutes. One of Hartford's men tried to flank around to the back of the cabin. Phantom alerted with a sharp bark. Marcus shifted positions and put 2 rounds through the back door at knee height. He heard a scream and the sound of someone falling. God damn it! Hartford shouted. Fall back! Regroup! The gunfire stopped. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. He was breathing hard, adrenaline flooding his system. Upstairs, he could hear Emma crying softly, Rebecca whispering comfort to her. Last chance, Chen, Hartford called out. I'm done playing games. You have 60 seconds to come out with your hands up and the documents, or I'm burning that cabin down with all of you inside. Marcus looked at the wood stove, at the kerosene lamps, at the propane tank for the kitchen stove. Hartford wasn't bluffing. The cabin was a tinderbox. 10 minutes. 30 seconds. Marcus made a decision. He couldn't let them burn the cabin with Rebecca and Emma inside. He couldn't let them get the documents either. There was only one play left. He grabbed his backpack and the fireproof safe containing the documents. Rebecca, he called up to the loft, no matter what happens, stay inside. Don't come out until you hear Sheriff Bridger's voice. Do you understand? Marcus, what are you? Promise me. I promise. Marcus turned to Phantom. Guard, stay with them. Protect Emma. The dog whined, confused. His training told him to stay with his handler, but the command was clear. Stay, Marcus repeated firmly. Reluctantly, Phantom moved to the base of the stairs, positioning himself between the door and the loft. Marcus gave him one last look, then turned to face the door. He took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to David's ghost, and kicked open the front door. I'm coming out, he shouted. Hold your fire. He stepped out into the glare of the headlights, his hands raised, the backpack slung over one shoulder, the safe held in front of him. 6 rifle muzzles tracked his movement. Hartford stepped forward, a satisfied smile on his face. Smart choice, Mr. Chen. Now set down the... Marcus never let him finish. In one fluid motion, he hurled the heavy fireproof safe directly at the nearest SUV's windshield. It hit with a thunderous crash, the headlight exploding, throwing that section of the perimeter into darkness. Then Marcus dropped and rolled to his right, drawing his pistol as he moved, firing 3 rapid shots at the next SUV's front tire. It exploded with a bang, the vehicle lurching sideways. "Shoot him!" Hartford screamed. But Marcus was already moving, using the momentary chaos he'd created to sprint for the tree line. Bullets kicked up dirt around his feet. Bark exploded from trees as he dove into the darkness of the forest. He zigzagged, using every piece of cover, every shadow, the darkness swallowing him like an old friend. Behind him, he could hear Hartford screaming orders, men crashing through the underbrush in pursuit. But Marcus was a SEAL, trained in escape and evasion. This was his element. He moved like a ghost, leaving no trail, making no sound, putting distance between himself and his pursuers. 5 minutes. He circled back, staying in the shadows, working his way around to the road. He could see Hartford's men spreading out, searching the forest. They had left 2 guards at the vehicles. A mistake. Hartford had committed too many men to the pursuit. Marcus approached from the blind side of the last SUV, moving with practiced silence. The guard never saw him coming. A precise strike to the pressure point behind the ear, and the man dropped without a sound. Marcus caught him, lowered him gently to the ground, and took his rifle. 2 minutes. He moved to the second guard, but this one was more alert. He spun at the last second, bringing his weapon up. Marcus had no choice. He fired once, the suppressor on the rifle reducing the shot to a heavy thump. The guard fell. Marcus grabbed the man's radio. Through it, he could hear Hartford's furious voice. "Where is he? How can you not find one man?" Then, cutting through the chaos, came the most beautiful sound Marcus had ever heard. Sirens. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast, their lights already visible down the mountain road. "Federal agents!" A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "This is the FBI. Weapons down. Hands in the air. Now!" Hartford's men emerged from the forest, confused and panicked. Some raised their hands. Others tried to run. It didn't matter. Within minutes, the clearing was full of federal agents, real ones surrounding Hartford and his team, cuffing them, reading them their rights. Sheriff Bridger was among them, along with a woman in an FBI windbreaker who looked like she was in charge. Marcus stepped out of the shadows, lowering his weapon. "Marcus Chen?" the FBI agent called out. "That's me." She approached cautiously, her hand near her own weapon. "Special Agent Elizabeth Warren, FBI. Are the hostages safe?" "Inside the cabin, unharmed, under guard by my K-9. "And the documents?" Marcus pointed to the fireproof safe, now lying dented but intact near the damaged SUV. "Everything's in there. Everything you need to put these bastards away. Forever." Agent Warren nodded to her team, who carefully retrieved the safe. Then she turned back to Marcus, her expression softening slightly. "You did good work here, Mr. Chen, against bad odds. Your brother would be proud." Those words again. Marcus felt something break loose in his chest, something that had been locked tight for 2 years. He managed a nod, not trusting himself to speak. The cabin door opened and Rebecca emerged, Emma in her arms, Phantom at her heels. The dog immediately ran to Marcus, circling him, checking him for injuries with his nose. Marcus dropped to one knee and buried his face in the dog's fur for just a moment, letting the simple, uncomplicated love of his K-9 partner ground him. Emma wriggled out of her mother's arms and ran to Marcus. Without hesitation, she threw her small arms around his neck. "You saved us again," she whispered. "Thank you." Marcus held her, this little girl who was his brother's daughter, who had lost her father but found protection in a haunted SEAL who'd thought he was done saving people. "You're safe now," he murmured. "You're both safe. I promise." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink, the full scope of the conspiracy began to unravel. The documents David had collected were even more damaging than Marcus had realized. By noon, federal prosecutors were already moving to indict Senator Richard Vance, Colonel Hartford, and 6 CEOs of major defense contractors. By evening, the story had broken nationwide, a massive corruption scandal that reached into the highest levels of the military-industrial complex. David Morrison's name was everywhere, hailed as a whistleblower who had given his life to expose corruption. The Navy announced it was awarding him a posthumous commendation for extraordinary courage, and in a quiet corner of Colorado, in a small cabin in the mountains, 3 people and 1 dog sat by a fire, finally safe, finally at peace. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, Emma asleep on her lap. Marcus looked at her, at this woman who was his brother's widow, at the child who was his brother's legacy, and he knew with absolute certainty what came next. "Now," he said simply, "we become a family, David's family, and I keep the promise I made him. I take care of you, both of you, for as long as you need me." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "But Marcus, your life, your solitude, was killing me," he finished quietly. "I came to these mountains to hide from the world, to escape the guilt of failing my brother. But you know what I learned? I didn't fail him. He sent me here to protect you. He knew that someday you'd need me, and he knew I'd answer that call." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter David had written him, now creased and worn from being read a dozen times. David wrote this before he died. He knew they were going to kill him, and his last thought, his final act, was to make sure you'd be protected, to make sure I'd be here when you needed me. Rebecca read the letter, tears streaming down her face. "He always said you were his best friend, his brother. He loved you, Marcus, and I loved him. I still do." Marcus looked down at Phantom, who had laid his massive head on Marcus's knee. "But I was wrong to think that loving him meant hiding from life. Real love, the kind David had for you, means protecting, fighting, being there even when it's hard." Emma stirred in Rebecca's lap, her eyes opening. She looked at Marcus with those solemn, old-soul eyes that reminded him so much of her father. "Are you staying?" she asked. Marcus smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his usually stern face. "Yeah, sweetheart, I'm staying, if that's okay with you and your mom." Emma nodded seriously. "It's okay. Daddy would want you to stay." And in that moment, in that small cabin in the Colorado mountains, 3 broken people began the slow work of healing together. They would grieve, they would struggle, they would have nightmares and hard days and moments of crushing sadness. But they would have each other, and they would have purpose. Marcus would teach Emma about her father, about honor and courage and sacrifice. He would help Rebecca rebuild her life, and they would help him rebuild his. To remember that a warrior's greatest strength isn't in how hard he can fight, but in what he chooses to fight for. David Morrison had fought for truth and justice, and in the end, his fight had saved not just his family, but the integrity of the military he'd served so faithfully. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it Phantom's loyalty, Marcus's protection, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story. The autumn sun was warm on Marcus's face as he stood in Arlington National Cemetery, Phantom sitting calmly at his side. Before them, a new memorial had been dedicated, a small stone marker in the whistleblower's garden, honoring those who had given their lives to expose corruption and protect the innocent. David Morrison's name was engraved there, along with a simple inscription. He gave everything for the truth. Rebecca and Emma stood beside him. Emma was 6 now, taller, her face fuller with health and happiness. She wore a small backpack, not the one she'd carried during her ordeal, but a new one, decorated with stars and the Navy SEAL trident. "Daddy was a hero," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "Yes, he was," Marcus agreed. "The best kind of hero. The kind who stood up for what was right, even when it cost him everything." They had come a long way in the past year. Rebecca had testified at the trials, her courage in the face of intense pressure, from defense attorneys helping to secure convictions for all the major players in the corruption network. Senator Vance, Colonel Hartford, and 4 defense contractor CEOs were now serving lengthy federal prison sentences. Marcus had been awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for his actions in rescuing Rebecca and Emma and protecting the whistleblower documents. He'd accepted it in a quiet ceremony, with Rebecca and Emma there to watch. It helped heal some of the wounds, to know that he had, in the end, honored his promise to his brother. They had moved out of the mountain cabin. Too many bad memories in that place. Instead, they'd found a small house in Colorado Springs, near the military community, where Emma could go to a good school and Rebecca could rebuild her life. Marcus had started working as a consultant for the VA, helping other veterans transition back to civilian life. He understood their struggles, their nightmares, their guilt, and he could tell them truthfully. There is life after war. There's purpose after loss. You just have to be willing to fight for it. Phantom was semi-retired now, spending his days as Emma's constant companion and guardian. But he still trained with Marcus regularly, keeping his skills sharp, just in case. As they stood at the memorial, a young sailor approached, fresh-faced and nervous. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Marcus Chen?" Marcus nodded. "I'm Petty Officer James Carpenter. I just graduated from Bud S. They told us about you in training, about how you saved the Morrison family, exposed the corruption. Sir, I just wanted to say, you're the reason I wanted to become a SEAL, to make a difference like you did." Marcus looked at this young warrior, seeing in him the same idealism and courage that David had possessed, and he felt a surge of hope. "Make good choices, Petty Officer," Marcus said, shaking his hand. "Remember why you signed up, and take care of your brothers. That's the only thing that matters." The sailor saluted and walked away, his steps lighter. Rebecca slipped her hand into Marcus's. "That was nice," she said softly. "David's legacy," Marcus replied. "It's going to outlive all of us." As they turned to leave, Emma tugged on Marcus's hand. "Uncle Marcus?" He smiled at the title. It had taken her months to feel comfortable calling him that, but now it came naturally. "What is it, kiddo?" "Can we come back next year to visit Daddy?" "Every year," Marcus promised, "for as long as you want." "Forever, then," Emma said firmly, "because I'll always want to remember him." "Me too," Marcus said quietly. They walked back through the cemetery, past thousands of white headstones marking the graves of heroes, men and women who had served, who had sacrificed, who had given everything for their country and their brothers and sisters in arms. David was among them now, his name etched in stone, his sacrifice honored. But his real legacy wasn't in the ground or on a memorial wall. It was in the little girl who carried his courage, in the woman who carried his love, and in the brother who carried his memory and his mission forward. Marcus had come to the mountains looking for escape, for a place to hide from his failures and his grief. But he'd found something better. He'd found redemption. He'd found family. He'd found a reason to keep fighting, and he'd learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the greatest missions aren't the ones you choose, but the ones that choose you. The ones that find you when you least expect them and show you what you're really made of. Phantom walked beside them, his tail high, his gait confident, the old military working dog who had led Marcus to that mine, who had started this entire journey with his relentless insistence that something was wrong, that someone needed help. Dogs knew, they always knew, when humans were lost, when people were in danger, when heroes needed to be called to action. Dogs knew. And if you were wise, you trusted them. As they reached the parking lot, Emma asked one more question. "Uncle Marcus, when I grow up, can I be like you and Daddy? Can I help people?" Marcus knelt down to her level, his hands on her small shoulders. "You can be anything you want, Emma. But you know what? You're already helping people. Every day. You help your mom by being brave. You help me by reminding me what I'm fighting for. And someday, when you're older, you're going to help lots of other people by sharing your father's story and showing them that good people still exist in this world." "That's a big job," Emma said seriously. "You come from a long line of people who did big jobs," Marcus replied. "Your father was a Navy SEAL. Your mother is one of the strongest people I've ever met. You've got the genes for it." Emma thought about this, then nodded. "Okay, I'll do it. For Daddy." "For Daddy," Marcus agreed. They drove home together, 3 people and 1 dog, an unlikely family forged in fire and darkness, bound together by loss and love and an unbreakable promise. The war wasn't over. There would always be new threats, new battles, new missions, but for now, they had peace, they had each other, and they had hope. And sometimes that was more than enough. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of courage, loyalty, redemption, and the unbreakable bonds between warriors and their K9 partners. Hit the notification bell so you never miss these powerful reminders that heroes walk among us, often in the places we least expect when we need them most.